In the last few days, the Occupy movements have been gaining steam and garnered much more domestic and international attention. The protest movement, started by a handful of anarchists in New York, have now become a truly global phenomenon. This is the origin of the movement, according to Wikipedia. In mid-2011, the Canadian-based Adbusters Foundation, best known for its advertisement-free anti-consumers magazine Adbusters, proposed a peaceful occupation of Wall Street to protest corporate influence on democracy, address a growing disparity in wealth, and the absence of legal repercussions behind the recent global financial crisis. According to Adbusters senior editor Mitch White, Adbusters suggested the idea on their email list mid-July, and it's spontaneously taken up by all people of the world. At their website, they wrote, beginning from one simple demand, a presidential commission to separate money from politics, we start setting the agenda for a new America. They promoted the protest with a poster featuring a dancer atop Wall Street's iconic charging bull. Activists from the internet group Anonymous encouraged its followers to take part in the protest, calling protesters to flood lower Manhattan, set up tents, kitchens, peaceful barricades, and occupy Wall Street. Other groups began to join in the organization of the protest, including the internet group Hacktivists Anonymous, the U.S. Day of Rage, and the NYC General Assembly, the governing body of the Occupy Wall Street group. The movement began as a response to the growing economic inequality in the United States and much of the world. This inequality has been growing over the last 40 years, where working class and middle class people have seen a reduction in living standards and real wages due to a policy of earnings not matching increases in inflation. Not only this, but there has been a tremendous increase in pay inequality between managerial employees and regular employees. In the 1950s, a CEO of a company could expect to receive 22 times what a regular employee makes. Now they receive 521 times. This trend has become much worse since 2000, when most of the banking deregulation took place under U.S. President George W. Bush. The global economic collapse of capitalism in 2008 has increased unemployment and economic stability tremendously. According to the Congressional Budget Office, between 1979 and 2007, incomes of the top 1% of Americans has grown by an average 275% versus just 40% for 60% of Americans who are in the middle of the income scale. Since 1979, average pre-tax income for the bottom 90% of households decreased by $90. And that top 1% increased by over $700,000 as federal taxation became less progressive. In 2009, the average income of the top 1% was $960,000, with a minimum income of $343,927. The top 1% of American population controls about 40% of the total wealth in the country, and the top 10% controls 73%. Over the last 30 years, the top 1% bore a smaller percentage of tax burdens, down 37% from in the year 2009, and 400 taxpayers with the highest income saw their income increase 392% and their tax rate go down 37%. Various celebrities have joined the support for the movement. Liberal educator and author Cornel West addressed the frustrations that some critics have expressed at the protest's lack of clear and unified message, saying it's impossible to translate the issue of greed of Wall Street into one demand or two demands. We're talking about a democratic awakening. Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Zizek gave a speech on Wall Street in which he expressed the support for the protest, saying, "They tell you we are dreamers. The true dreamers are those who think that this can go on indefinitely the way they are. We are not dreamers. We are awakening from a dream which is turning into a nightmare." On September 19, Roseanne Barr, the first celebrity to endorse the protest, spoke to protesters calling for a combination of capitalism and socialism and a system not based on bloated talk show radio hosts and that goddamn Ayn Rand book. The Occupy movements have gone beyond the issue of economics into other areas of concern for the public as well. In Occupy Boston, many protesters have taken to calling on the U.S. government to end its support of the apartheid regime in Israel. Occupy Boston protester Dennis Traynor says there is a growing awareness amongst the American population that Israel cannot continue its apartheid-like policies. He also noted the double standard when it comes to support for Israel and the Arab Spring. He believes that these protests were inspired directly from them. Later, a spontaneous protest broke out when it became known that the Canadian and Irish aid flotilla headed for Gaza had been stopped by the Israeli Defense Forces. Protesters broke off from the Dewey Square and headed towards the Israeli consulate, entered the lobby, and began a sit-in. The protesters were heard chanting, "Let their voices be heard." After police were called, the protesters decided that they had made their point and agreed to leave. In California, Occupy Oakland General Assembly called for a general strike after police injured an Iraq War veteran critically as they were kicking out protesters. Personally, I find much of the attention and sympathy given to military veterans who've been injured at these protests is misplaced. There's very little or no concern at all for 100 or 1,000 civilian protesters who have been injured by police actions. It's clear from the media that the life and well-being of a single veteran is worth more than 1,000 civilians, not to mention his presence at an event to promote freedom while having taken part in the Iraq War, the greatest war crime of the 21st century. Protesters took to the fifth largest container port in America and began blocking it from conducting operations. Tractor trailers were blocked off for most of the day, making it impossible for them to leave or enter the premises. In the evening around 8 p.m., it was announced that the next shift for the port was canceled due to their actions. The protesters declared victory and left along Maritime Street and returned to the occupied plaza. There was trouble with the police when a group of more dedicated protesters took over an unoccupied building on 16th Street sometime between 10 and 11 p.m. The building used to be Travelers Aid Society Alameda County, an organization that helped at-risk people and families that had been shut down due to budget cuts. The plan was to use the building as a community center for the movement. Unfortunately, the plan was never executed because riot police prevented it from happening. The general strike shows a clear indication of an escalation in the Occupy movements. It's beginning to seem that the Occupy movements are becoming more and more radical as time progresses and the media becomes more and more hateful towards them. The ruling class well knows this movement and what a threat it is to them. In the October 22nd edition of The Economist, the journal of elite opinion, they express their growing concern for the power of this movement. The magazine acknowledges the widespread anger towards its readership and acknowledges the legitimacy of it. The need now is for more radical action is clear. The ruling class of capitalists know what fate awaits them for those who oppress the people.